Dr. Mark Uranga, you are back, sir. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for having me again. And I'm sorry if I smell like mules today, because both times I've needed to clear my mind, visit my mules before I come in and talk to you, because these things get me so fired up.
Wait, you have actual mules?
Oh yeah, we got 3 now. So they are my therapists. I don't know if they're more or less expensive than a real therapist, but they're more fun.
Okay, so mules are the crossbreeding of a donkey and a horse, and it's my understanding that it's not as big as a horse, and it's not as pain in the ass as a burro, right? So it's like you get this great merger of you're kind of like a really, really big Great Dane.
Yeah, it's hybrid vigor, and it's an honest reflection of what's going on with me. I show up and I'm all like, I gotta get you ridden before I go see Matt Todd, and they're like, no, you're kind of off a little bit. Let's just calm you down. Let's clear your mind. And it's magical.
Do you have any llamas? You a llama guy?
No, but I'm sure my daughter would love to get llamas.
Dude, llamas are lit. The therapy. So you have therapy mules. You need a therapy llama.
There you go.
That's
the next podcast. The therapy mules for autism is another one of my passions. So we're out there. Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's great. I had no idea.
Well, there's lots to learn in this Wild West we inhabit.
God bless it. Okay, so look, I asked you to come back because, again, in going after different childhood therapies, again, people have anxiety around it, and God bless it. I think people should absolutely be as informed as possible and make decisions. They're like, I like this decision today. I'm going to like it next week. I'm going to like it in 20 years. The worst thing you want is somebody who makes decisions, good or bad, and then comes to regret them later on. And the best way you and I can help people make the best decision is just giving information. So I can never pronounce this disease. It's it's a bacterial influenza.
Exactly.
It is really bad. What is it called?
It's called Haemophilus Influenza B.
Okay. And it was described to me years ago, a couple years ago. They're like, look, this is one that used to keep pediatricians up at night because it is a disease, or it is an infection, a bacterial infection that children can get. And you go from totally fine to a fever in 3 hours to dead in 3 more hours. And in the absence of a therapy, it really is that thing. So talk to me about this disease. Talk to me about the therapies that we have, and talk to me about the results.
So HIB is the short version that most of us can all pronounce, but it is Haemophilus Influenza B. It is one of those illnesses that really drove the care of infants early in life because, like you described, any infant with a fever could be dead in a few hours. And so what the approach was for any infant under 3 months, we'd see them in the office. And I say we because I didn't practice in that era, but my colleagues did and have reminded me about this. So if an infant presented with a fever in the office, they would get a lumbar puncture in the office, an IM shot of an antibiotic, and an ambulance ride to the hospital.
And when was this? What time frame?
Yeah, not that long ago. So even when I started practice, we had a standard to do lumbar punctures all the way up to 3 months. And this was about 15 years ago. The activity of HIB and that process was still running its course. And because we hadn't yet become confident about the safety and efficacy of the HIB vaccine, more so the efficacy, I should say,
sure, we
had to keep in mind that was a potential cause of the fever in front of us. So 20 years ago, pediatricians were experts at lumbar punctures, and that's a spinal tap to see if there's white blood cells, HIB in the spinal fluid. And that was an important part of the diagnosis because it would lead to how long they would be treated. Would they be in the hospital for all of that course and that sort of thing?
Okay, so to be clear, 20 years ago, I was 2 years out of college, right? That was not that long ago. Yeah. So 20 years ago, if I had a kid, and my oldest is 14, so I apparently just missed this.
Just barely, yep.
20 years ago, if I had a kid and a little healthy infant, no problem, 2 months old, not 3 months, everything's totally fine. If that kid came down with a fever, and this is 2006, I would go into the pediatrician. They're like, this is what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to give him a spinal tap. We're going to have to do an intramuscular thing. And this kid's going to the emergency room or hospital right now. And I'm like, wait. How about we don't do the spinal tap? And the doctor says, that's fine. Just to let you know, if we're wrong, your kid's going to be dead in a couple hours.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they would have been right.
And they could have been right. And that's the unfortunate case of the fever, the febrile infant under 3 months, is that there was no way, because infants of that age don't really what we call localize. So when they're 3 years old, they're like, owie, my ear hurts, or you know, I have the worst headache of my life, or something different. But to mount a fever and probably be fussy or lethargic or whatever else it is, it's just a really generalized response to illness that doesn't help us determine at all where it's happening.
Gotcha. And again, what, like in the event that this that an infant had this disease and they were not treated right away for it, what was the mortality or like long-term damage rate?
So the prevalence, the mortality was about 4% of kids with invasive Hib. So
1 in 25 kids
who had invasive Hib. Now, of the people with fever, it's not that all had what we call invasive Hib. So you could have some other infection. You could have Hib that's just causing some superficial illness, but the type that was crossing the blood-brain barrier into the brain, if they're not treated, about 4% of those kids could die. And you know, there's the 96% that the mortality is a dramatic thing, but infecting a new brain is not usually a good plan. So things like cerebral palsy or other deficits could sure be something that kids would carry with them through their life.
That was, and that statistic nuance is something that it was actually described to me recently. They're like, look, they can't remember if it was measles or something else. They're like, you know, you can talk about mortality, and that's a really scary thing, and it's very, very intense, right? And okay, great. Like, and you'll make a decision based off that one metric, and that's fine. People should make decisions based off whatever. But what they also need to take into account, I can't remember if it was measles or something else, but they're like, look, the problem is the kids that don't face, you know, death, great, but then have lifelong ailments or impairments off of the disease. Because most people, and myself included, I look at diseases largely as like, okay, you either die or you get better. Yeah. That's it. And like, you're not, you know, whatever. It's like, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger kind of thing. They're like, yeah, unless you're paralyzed. And it's like, how do you mean? And that's another big layer for people to consider.
Yeah, it's not even that long ago that the last person in an iron lung because of a polio infection as a child recently passed away. These are things that can be decades and decades. And we have the blessing of caring for kids of all levels of health in our practice. And we certainly see kids that struggle from the beginning or because of an infection or something else like that. And that road is really difficult. And you're right, the numbers are dramatic, but the stories of the kids that survive or the kids that have long-term impairment are that much more powerful at times because of the way that their families face challenges. And it's often so inspiring and it's also devastating financially at times or other things like that. So you're right. We can look at mortality and we can put a number on that. And we can, the less easily described deficits, impacts and that sort of thing are something that is just such an individual experience that you can't really put a number on those in some ways.
This is a very, very ignorant question, and I apologize. When you say, hey, the kids that get this, the 96% that survive, okay, and great, 96% survive, very upsetting for the 4% that don't, and that's a big roll of the dice. For the 96% that do in fact survive, when you said you could have impairments like cerebral palsy, I am not actually familiar with that. And like, what is that properly defined? I know it exists. I know loosely what some of the symptoms are, but like, what is that impairment?
Largely, I would describe it as muscular spasticity and or weakness. So an inability to control your muscles quite as well. And that's because the motor portion of the brain is one that is most sensitive to insult, either for really preterm infants or infants that have a challenge in their early months. And we don't necessarily have a cutoff after which is like, hey, your brain's okay, do whatever. You're not going to have that problem. But within that historical, certainly up to 3 months, those things that could affect myelination and we know the plasticity of the brain obviously continues till 23, 24 in some cases, but the early period of formation and the motor context and that sort of thing. So CP can be something as simple cerebral palsy as somebody that has a foot drop. And
said a foot drop?
Foot drop.
What's a foot drop?
A foot drop would be like their foot is too weak to lift when you walk through your stride, you have to lift your toes up off of the ground. And if you're missing that, so you're kind of scraping that upper toe, and what you'll see is that people are going to walk we usually like to splint those and support them, but if they're not supported or splinted, they kind of swing that leg over and get this kind of off kilter walk. And then it can be as high as using or deficits in the muscle of the diaphragm. So people could lose their ability to breathe independently because of the certain levels of severity.
Gotcha. So cerebral palsy, broadly defined, is a symptom-based thing, which is an impairment of developing motor skills, both fine and gross.
Yeah, I'd say that's a great way to describe it.
Gotcha. Okay. And so this is something that again, cerebral palsy is not like, oh, you caught cerebral palsy. It's like cerebral palsy is a group of symptoms that result from a multitude of illnesses or like if you get in I assume if you got in a car accident as like a 2-month-old, you run a risk of having brain damage that leads to some degree of cerebral palsy. Like that's kind of the idea.
Yeah, an injury where there's not been enough oxygen to the brain for whatever reason, or those in that period of time. That's exactly it. So,
Understood.
Yeah.
So with this, you have the risk of you could develop some level of cerebral palsy, an impairment of fine or gross motor skills. What else could happen if you survived, or was that predominantly the big risk?
Part of some forms of meningitis include what we call a vasculitis. So the blood vessels can get impaired in other areas as well. And we kind of focus on the brain because it's such a sensitive organ.
Sure.
But by the time you get that sick, if blood flow is impaired to the kidneys or to the liver or to other organs, it's really uncommon that those are heart attacking kids. But those sort of things where basically things are shutting down. You could get long-term kidney failure if your proteins basically build up too much and you get enough inflammation around the kidney that it's not functioning quite as well. And we had talked about this a little bit with vitamin K, but one of the things that we don't know to the extent that in some ways we would like is how things can progress with something like HIB, because 20 and 30 years ago, we were aware of it, but the degree of diagnostic testing and the frequency of MRIs and all these other sorts of things that are the follow-ons to both diagnosis and the sequelae really have evolved in a way that we would probably have a lot more nuance to how HIB meningitis recovery would look like in this day and age.
When you say the diagnosis and the sequelae, what's sequelae? Is that the time following the diagnosis?
Exactly. Okay. Sequelae are the things that follow an initial insult, for example, like the meningitis and other associated things. And so maybe in a month or two, it's not evident that cerebral palsy is there, but later on it's there, or later on symptoms of trouble with school or whatever. Some of the more sensitive to pick up items don't really become apparent till later. That's an example of those.
Right. Because you're naturally you're not going to tap into, like if you have an impairment in the portion of your brain that deals with like STEM, right? Where you're doing math or things like that. Like that's not going to find representation until you attempt to engage in STEM. Now, I don't think there's like a STEM zone, right? But there, like there are different portions of your brain that are like, okay, you're better. Processing. Or if you have, like impulse control, right? Like if you have damage to that area, it's like, okay, everybody expects the 3-month-old has no control over anything. So impulse control, whatever. But then as you start to expect this to start developing as an 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, and you see a lack of capacity towards impulse control. And then especially as in teenage years, you're like, okay, like we expect some of this because you're like 16 and a wild animal, Matt, but like you should be able to start working through this a little bit. Right. And so that's when that representation of like, oh, there might be some damage here from something in the past. Yeah.
And I think you really nicely encapsulate the conundrum of development, which underlies a lot of the discussion. It's kind of the background noise about vaccine hesitancy. That development could be affected is probably the biggest kind of thing out there. And development, just like you're talking about, it's not like at day 3 we just run some tests and we're like, okay, you're going to get 1530 on your SATs and you're going to be a left-handed baseball player, yada, yada, yada. And so the things that become apparent later in life, by definition, are not apparent early on. And that the same thing applies to recovery from whatever illness it is. If it's RSV, does asthma follow from that? If it's Hib, meningitis, is it the sequelae of that? If it's pertussis, what were the airways going to be like later on? How reactive are they going to be? And so I think that the point you make is really a good one of like, dodged a bullet, had Hib, meningitis, and we got the IV antibiotics and yada yada, stuck in the hospital for a little bit, but you're not really out of the clear. And one of the hard things that one of the harder discussions we have as pediatricians is when something is known to have a possible effect in kids, and we see this genetic disorders, or we see it with diagnoses or recovery from something like this, and every visit there's an anxiety, a wonder, a worry, like, what is it that we're going to see in the future when we move forward? What can I expect in the future? And something like a early experience of meningitis, we just don't know. And that's really hard for parents, that lingering uncertainty as they recover from that.
Yeah. I was having a discussion with somebody the other day about the infant hearing test and how people are opting out of infant hearing tests. And it's like, okay, that's like fine, whatever. But it is a consideration because as the sensitivity of an infant's hearing in the first month of life isn't going to change a whole lot of things and that you do with the infant, because the infant's, like this completely incapacitated person who's like, whatever, I'm just here, right? Take care of me. I'll scream whether I can hear you or not. Doesn't matter to me. But then as you get to school age, as you get to, the adult life, these are huge problems that come along. Like I had a lot of ear infections when I was a kid and I'm allergic to milk, and it was always like, finish your milk. And that led to a lot of, at least the physicians felt at the time, they're like, okay, this is probably what contributed to him having ear infections constantly. So I couldn't hear, I didn't have great hearing. So I became a very late talker. I have since made up for it, obviously. But that's, again, those downstream effects. And then I had to have a speech therapist when I was in like 3rd or 4th grade. And, so we have these downstream effects and costs even to the community, because now you got to hire, like you have an obligation through the public school to hire a speech therapist and things of this nature. So we have these downstream effects of people making decisions, obviously. And again, I'm not advocating one way or another, but these are things that do in fact affect the community and affect other people around us as we make the decisions and go forward.
Yeah, and the background we're aware of, largely speaking, for vaccines, and they all have their different cost and benefit discussion. But when you're looking for a public health intervention, or even a familial health intervention, or a personal health intervention, by and large, vaccine is the best bang for your buck that you can do. We talk about how much it costs to vaccinate all the kids that you would prevent a couple of cases of Hib meningitis. But like you're saying, if that Hib meningitis causes ICU stays, if it causes IEP plans through schools, and we all know that it's not well covered for certain insurance carriers, and all that leads to bankruptcy, and all these other downstream things are they shouldn't outweigh the health consideration for the child. But there are definitely those aspects that we don't get into, because it's not necessarily our role as a physician, but when we walk with families along the road, and not to say like specifically vaccine preventable illness, but chronic illness that can occur, you just see how difficult each of those decisions come, what trade-offs they have for a certain therapy versus, are they going to be able to put their kid in this school or that school, or who's going to support their needs so that the family can continue to work. All those things are built in to what we know about our public health investment in vaccines, helping kids stay healthy and active, and therefore their families, helping them stay intact, but also helping them, continue to have the goals that they wanted to have when they started having kids.
Man, I gotta be honest with you. You're the first physician I've ever heard say like, hey man, we have these vaccine therapies. They all got pros and cons. That's it. Like, I don't think I've ever even heard a physician say, hey, we got pros and cons. Now, mind you, we think the pros deeply outweigh the cons, but like, sure, man, pros and cons, like whatever. And you make your calculus on that. And like, we just go from there. Like, that's such Like, it seems so odd. Like, I got a kid who's 14 years old, and the fact that I've never heard a pediatrician be like, hey, you got your positives, you got your negatives, we all make the call. And it's like, God, man, that's we need more of that. Okay, so going back to this, what the Hib? You have an intramuscular shot. You do the spinal tap, and you have a trip to the hospital. What has changed so we don't do that now, or we're less inclined to do that now?
So what has changed is the prevalence of invasive Hib disease. So in medicine, we have something called a pretest probability. So before I throw you through an MRI or before I draw your blood to look for an infection, what is the probability we have that an infection in this case is the cause of that? And so if you have a much higher prevalence of an illness,
you have a higher probability of searching for that thing.
Yeah. So your pretest probability is higher, and so you use that to justify certain testing criteria.
Sure.
And we use this not just in Hib, but there's a standard for moms that come in and maybe have a fever and labor and some other things like that. One of the things that's evolved overall is we get these great statistical models that we're starting to apply in real time better and better. And with Hib, again, previously, we didn't have all that information, but now that we know that invasive Hib is so much less common throughout my career, I'd like to think of it as short still, but 15 years or so, we have been seeing that, like when they're 3 months in, and I did my last lumbar puncture in arriving at Boise about 15 years ago. Is always kind of a point of pride when you're like, I didn't get any white blood cells. You call it a champagne tap because you got a reliable sample of the spinal fluid, and that would set up the course of treatment potentially. So if you get just between the spinal space, it's kind of an elegant test that really changes the outcome. And I don't get to do those anymore. Not that I love them, but I don't do those anymore because the likelihood that we have invasive Hib has fallen so much.
What caused it to fall?
Vaccination.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, okay, hang on. When 20 years ago, what was the shot you were giving them in the arm after the spinal tap? Was that like a treatment, or was that the vaccination?
That was antibiotic.
Okay. So the vaccination didn't really exist 20 years ago.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I didn't clarify that from the beginning, but that shot with invasive bacterial infection of almost any kind, what we call parenteral route. So but even better, IV, because IV obviously circulates much more quickly. But in your physician's office, it's better to have something starting to circulate through the muscle and into the blood than nothing. That parenteral route of antibiotic is the most effective to immediately penetrate. And so this speaks to reemerging diseases. I don't know what this shot is. I probably studied it. It's probably ceftriaxone or something like that, but it's an IM antibiotic.
That's the one from 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's the one I don't have to know about, but yet maybe I will. But so they would have that experience. You'd send off the spinal culture, and like I said, if you have the champagne tap or a reliable spinal test, then you find there is or isn't bacteria in there, then that guides your therapy.
Gotcha.
Meningitis, again, a therapy I don't know. Roughly, it's like a week to 2. IV treatment, when you have a little dudette, they don't deal well with IVs at home, so usually you're like a week or 2 in the hospital when you could have been home working on tummy time and doing all these contrast things that people like to do from all these influencers and whatever else. But instead, you're stuck in the hospital.
Oh my God.
Sorry, that was a bad word.
So
trigger
bad.
word.
Oh, they're the worst. Like, listen, I love my wife. Okay. But I got to tell you, she was following this gal a couple years ago, and my wife is not like a big social media gal, but this person had a particular channel where she was talking about health, and my wife somehow found her, and she's like, hey, I like what this person has to say. Not too extreme, not too crazy, like no big deal. So for my 40th birthday, she's like, this gal got this mobile sauna. And I was like, what? So she gives me, for my 40th birthday, this sauna. Now the sauna is a zip up sauna. Okay. So it looks like a quarter circle that just goes from the floor up to my neck. There's a hole for my neck. Okay. And then it's like this thing and you zip yourself into it and you're sitting here. Like, it looks like you have like a quarter of a camping tent and your head's poking out and it's like, oh, it's red light therapy. And I was like, what is this? And I love my wife and I was grateful, but I was like, hon, I don't ever see myself using this, like sitting here in this car. And she used it. She was like, yeah, this product stinks. I'm like, yeah. And then she had to unfollow this lady. She's like, she sold us out. Influencers selling stuff. Anyway, so you do a lot of contrasting things and like early infant development. They have, you ever see those dog influencers where they're like, you get a puppy and you got to like hold them upside down and like shake them. Don't shake the dog. But like, you got to hold them and you got to do things. And it's like, orient and touch their paws a lot. And like, and it's all like, animal influencers like, this is how you get the dog to like you.
Yeah, it's same for kids. And it's way better to be home wondering about that goofy stuff than to be stuck in a hospital and worried about, first of all, if they're going to live. But then beyond that, just trying to keep their head round because they can't do their tummy time as well. And just all these little, like 2 to 3 months, those are the times we start to get the smile move into the laugh. And then people are like, oh my gosh, this kid they're kind of fun to be around now because, wow, instead of the crying, they're smiling at me. They think I'm cool. Then they laugh at me. And all that stuff is that prime time when Hib meningitis would potentially be treated in the hospital.
Yeah. I had this interesting thought years ago that there's an aspect of child rearing that allows you to be a superhero to at least one person. And you even feel like a superhero yourself because it's so hard and you have to do it. And then you get positive feedback. And it's like, in the absence of that, what are we? Like, I know plenty of people don't want to have kids and that's fine. And sadly, there are some people that want kids and can't have them. And hopefully they can do adoption or something. But man, raising a person, how else are you going to become a hero? Like, what, you're going to balance the books like you're an accountant? Like, no shade on accountants, but like, I'm not going to go home if I'm an accountant and be like, I did that. Like, I did something for something. Like, it's a thing. Anyway, so.
Yeah, multiply that by 1,600 and I'm a pediatrician.
Oh,
it's a good job.
Yeah. Okay, so how long ago did the Hib vaccine come out then? So 20 years ago, spinal tap, shot in the arm, maybe in the hospital, IV, the whole bit. When did the Hib vaccine come out?
I don't have that exact date, but it was roughly 20 years ago. And roughly 2008 is when they start seeing the change. The biggest change came when they licensed it for kids 2 months and under, or 6 weeks. We call it 2 months, but 6 weeks and over is when you look at a curve of invasive Hib meningitis. So prior to that, we're trying to decrease the prevalence in the communities. And that's why you still have the protocol of like, okay, the prevalence is high enough.
Still high enough. Mm-hmm. And we can't change that right now. It's still high enough that we have to go through, the champagne tap, the whole thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But then right around 2008, they say, okay, the vaccine's out, and then they license it for 6 weeks.
Yeah, 6 weeks, and it's now a 2 to 3 part series before a year, and there's another one again at 15 months. We can talk about epiglottitis here, which is also cool, super cool. Epiglottitis. But importantly for the febrile infant, the things that happened after 2008 are what start to drive those changes that just I've watched. Like first it's like, well, gosh, if they're up to 3 months, if they're 2 to 3 months, and they're reassuring exam and whatever, like they come in. Yeah, we maybe see them in the ER, but they go home. They don't maybe, and then there's like, do we give them a little bit of an antibiotic preemptively, get some blood cultures? If they're looking good, they don't need the spinal tap. Just consistently, each new guideline has stepped down in terms of what is required to keep kids safe in that uncertainty of a fever in that age.
And this is because as the vaccine was rolled out and as people started getting vaccinated, the prevalence of Hib, the actual infection, started decreasing so much that you're like, look, the probability 10 years ago was reasonable enough that we take this protocol. Mm-hmm. The probability of it being this now, if you're vaccinated, is so low that we don't even engage in these therapies anymore. And it appears that you are correct in those, right? Like, you're
Right.
not like, oh yeah, we stopped doing this 15 years ago and then we had to start again 10 years ago because it was all bad. It's like you guys have data from the last 2 decades that have effectively reinforced. It's like, yep, that was effective at essentially eliminating the risk profile that would cause this protocol.
Yeah. So the decrease in prevalence was over 100-fold. We went from about 20 cases per 100,000, yes, rare, but even more rare to under 0.25 per 100,000. So that decrease is absolutely what underlies all the statistics that support the safety of that approach, right? So as guidelines come out, somebody continues to kind of surveil what is the prevalence of invasive Hib meningitis, and I think right now we're kind of surfing into the coast right now. So we have not seen as much vaccine hesitancy until recently, and it was increasing, and it's going to fluctuate a little bit. But we're still riding a decreased prevalence of Hib in certain age groups, and those age groups of like probably early school years into high school, and some of these older siblings to what is now an infant or whatever. So we have not gone backwards yet in our approach to the febrile infant. We have definitely have an awareness of the difference of a febrile infant that's been vaccinated or has the potential exposure to somebody that's not been vaccinated. So even though under 2 months infants aren't routinely vaccinated against Hib, the change in prevalence and the circulation of Hib is so much that we can rely on that herd immunity, that herd immunity to protect the 1 to 2 monthers. And even those kids don't get quite as much intervention as they had in the past.
And when you go from 20 to 0.25, that's a 1/80th.
Yeah.
Right. So like this isn't like, hey, we cut it in half. It's like, now we cut it in 80.
Yeah. And 95% effective in preventing in the vaccinated child Hib meningitis. So a huge difference.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And these are numbers that, cancer researchers or whatever, or heart disease researchers would die for. Maybe I should use that word. Yeah. But they would love to, or the pharmaceutical companies would love to have something that they could sell you on TV that would decrease your risk by that much. And that's where something like Hib vaccine is such a great example of the efficacy.
Gotcha. Okay. So what's in it? Like, is it a live virus? Is it a dead, live viruses are through the nose.
Not always. There's just a couple that have what we call live attenuant. You're totally fine. And that it's super helpful to think of that for some of the responses that can happen. So, all the way back to smallpox and the things that started the idea that you might prevent an infectious disease by giving a little version of it. There was cowpox for the milkmaids classically. If somebody had people that were milking had cowpox, they were less likely to get significant smallpox. Or all along, basically this idea of inoculation to then vaccination is the idea that we can prime your immune system. And the earliest examples of that were a similar virus. And then we got to a small dose of, and this is like Revolutionary War times in the Continental Army. They'd use a little teeny tiny bit of smallpox and hope it didn't kill you. But that was an example. If it didn't kill you, it made you stronger.
Gotcha.
Then then you could like chop up the whole bacteria or virus in a blender, nice blender. And this is wholesale pertussis. This was causing more fevers and that sort of stuff. And then you could attenuate. You could basically make the virus weaker. So measles is an example of that. Varicella is an example of that. The flu mist is an attenuated virus. And then they started pulling out parts of a virus that's the most important part of the what we call virulence, the infectivity of the virus. And then within some of those, what was found is that you can either conjugate them or you can put them in with something else that makes the immune system recognize, hey, I just got a little bit of this, but I should be responding to it. And so that's what basically the Hib vaccine is, what we call a conjugate virus. or conjugate vaccine.
So something that it would, if I'm understanding, you're like, look, we're going to give you a tiny bit, but we're going to upregulate your immune system sensitivity. So they're like, hey man, this is just a teeny little thing, but like I'm pissed off. Like, go after that thing.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it enables us to have safer vaccines with fewer side effects and similar efficacy, and in some cases fewer doses. For example, for the Hib vaccine, there's an option to use a 3-part series at 2, 4, and 6 months, or a 2-part series at 2 and 4 months. The second of which is the product that is used in my clinic, and it has the Haemophilus Influenza B polyribosyl ribitol phosphate. That's the capsule of Hib. And so they pick out the one protein that if our immune system's got these molecules that are designed to recognize in 3D a very specific other molecule.
Okay.
That's the cause of allergies if you have them. It's our immune memory and all that other sort of stuff. So basically, they create this most important recognition. But that's like we were just saying, it's not enough for the immune system to say, oh yeah, I'm going to use all my energy to be ready for Hib. It's kind of like, hey, that's not a big deal. But they need to have either a conjugate or what we call an adjuvant. So conjugated means that it's that molecule is hooked onto something else to make it more easily recognized. And an adjuvant means that the molecule just has a little bit of general upregulation. So what is used in Hib is the Neisseria meningitidis outer membrane protein complex. So Neisseria meningitidis is a different cause of meningitis, but a specific protein in there is really immunogenic. It really causes a good immune response.
Gotcha.
So although it's coming from that
other
thing, it doesn't protect from that other thing per se. And then it has...
So that's the thing that turbocharges the immune system. It signals like, get really worked up.
Yeah, about this molecule. The
immune system gets worked up about that thing, and then it comes after it.
Yep.
Great.
And it has 0.5 milliliters is the dose that we use. And within that, there's 225 micrograms or 0.22 milligrams of amorphous aluminum hydroxyphosphate sulfate. So aluminum is what we would call more of an adjuvant. So it's a teeny tiny dose. And this is something that I think gets more press in the vaccine hesitancy conversation is aluminum. So that aluminum basically creates a little bit more of an immune reaction to what we want it to react to, which is Hib. Aluminum, by itself, it's the third most common element in the world. And it makes up about 9%. I just learned this. You keep teaching me things by asking me questions.
I'm here for you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So it's about 9% of the Earth's crust is made up of aluminum, mixed with other things or whatever. And certain things like tea actually concentrates aluminum for whatever reason.
Tea as in like the leaf?
Yeah, like the plant will bioaccumulate aluminum.
Oh.
So
just naturally.
I haven't asked tea why it's doing that.
Well, no, what I'm saying is
but is it an antibiotic? Is it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I was asking is because you're like, hey, look, there's this plant growing right next to this smelter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And this plant is very rich in aluminum. So when I say naturally, it's like, well, that's kind of an unnatural environment for it to exist in, right? But if you're like, no, you go to the middle of the Amazon where there is nothing, and you will find aluminum in like the Brazil nut tree.
Exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah. And that's just it. So, obviously we come across aluminum. We don't, prehistorically or whatever, we didn't get it as a shot, but the amount of aluminum that's in the Hib vaccine, as I mentioned, is so low when you compare that to the other sources of aluminum. And we can, I don't know if you want to talk about that other comparison, but when we look at each of those ingredients, last thing is sodium chloride, table salt. So
gotcha.
With water. So, in this specific case, it just needed to suspend that 0.5 milliliters. So
gotcha.
You have all of those that through testing and in this specific product, testing for both previously and in the studies, safety and efficacy, and now testing for content that, hey, this is what we've got, in our Hib vaccine. This is what we got. And, there could be bigger discussions about, is there a better way to get there or that? But we know that's what we've got. And we know when we had that in testing, that's what led to this 80-fold decrease in Hib and, no significant vaccine reactions that were overwhelming compared to that efficacy and safety in the big picture.
Gotcha. With the aluminum, okay, because I imagine you get the virus in your system, your body goes after it. Okay, great, whatever it is. With the aluminum, does that come out of your system? Can you test the urine and fecal matter of infants and be like, okay, here's that aluminum that we, put in?
I can't think of a way that you could biotag that aluminum for the reason that, and I could be wrong, but the reason being that if we compare aluminum that's used as adjuvant in vaccines, the total amount is about 4.4 milligrams in the complete series of 0 to 6 months.
Okay.
A breastfed baby will get about 7 milligrams in the breast milk of aluminum during the course of that 6 months.
Back up.
Go ahead.
Back up. So in a 6-month series, a baby will get, let's just call it a nice even 4 milligrams from the Hib vaccine series. And
all infant vaccine series, sorry.
All vaccine series.
Everything that was recommended up until a few months ago. Yep.
Okay. So we'll get 4 milligrams, let's just say about, in all of the vaccines up to 6 months. And if you don't give your kid any vaccines, which is totally fine, you don't give your kid any vaccines, that baby will ingest through breast milk 7 milligrams of aluminum.
Exactly.
How do you mean? Where does that aluminum come from the breast milk? Or is this something that we are all ingesting on the regular? We just ingest it in a myriad of ways and slowly, and that comes out we're just interacting with aluminum constantly. Yeah.
Well, given that it's 9% of the Earth's crust, if we have a dust cloud come through Boise and some lands on your apple, then you're eating aluminum. And and that's not even necessarily bioaccumulation, but just the prevalence of that. Now, this is a number that is based on current exposures. Again, it is ubiquitous, but we talk about if your kid's sucking on the lip of your Coke can, not recommended, but how much aluminum do they get at those times? Clearly, aluminum's a valuable way to keep food safe and that sort of stuff. So our ingestion of aluminum probably is higher than prehistorical.
Okay. Again, my ignorance, my apologies. I bought an Italian espresso machine a couple years ago. I was just like, whatever, I'll get it. Sounds great. Somebody had one and I had an espresso. I was like, that's awesome. I'm a big coffee freak. I was like, dude, let's get a little Italian espresso machine. This looks super, you're just bored in life. You're a kid. So I grab one and it looks super cool. And it's it's like a flat metal instead of shiny. I like flat black and flat silver and whatever. Anyway, and I'm using it and the wife sees it and she's like, we're throwing that away. I'm like, why? She's like, that's made of aluminum. I'm like, I don't care. She was like, but you should. And so she throws it away. And I was like, but that was $10. And then 2 days later, a stainless steel one shows up. She's like, I'm not against the Italian espresso. In fact, she was like, make me one. But she was also like, you can't cook with aluminum because you can't do. Now, what's interesting too, is there's aluminum, you have aluminum baking trays, you have, tin foil.
Oh yeah.
My friends from Ireland call it aluminium, whatever.
There's no I there.
You're right. And then you have the videos of dudes in Africa, melting down tin cans and making pans out of them. So I guess what I'm getting at is I had never really considered, I should have put this together. The wife's like, no, look, to the degree that we can minimize aluminum use with cooking and, agitating with our food, that's great. But then I drink the dumb bubbly water, aluminum. I've been drinking from aluminum cans as long as I can remember. And so all of that brings trace amounts of aluminum into my system.
Yeah.
Constantly.
And
Oh my God, It's all over.
Oh no, you're just over there kicking yourself. I'm not here to say aluminum's bad. In fact, if the aluminum industry's listening, don't hate me.
You got to call it from here on out. You have to call it aluminium.
Aluminium. It doesn't spell like that. I've tried it. I keep it.
Dude, they say
Aluminium.
the weirdest thing. You ever talk to somebody who's Brazilian, like Portuguese is their friend? You ever hear them say no? Yeah, right. So you ever hear them say no? Because no, it's like now. It has like 4 vowels.
Yeah, they love their.
What do you say now? Yeah, it's very odd. Anyway, okay, so aluminum is everywhere.
Yeah, aluminum is everywhere, and yeah, maybe there is a place, and this gets to a little bit of the curiosity we talk about with. Gosh, these could be good questions, and what if there was a system to answer these questions called science? So the safety and efficacy of something like this is we could be asking questions differently and getting different answers, but the questions we've answered thus far with vaccines and with the use of aluminum and again, I feel like it's a short career, but I've seen a response to some of the questions that arise from people from social media, before there was social media, from MTV and talk shows and other stuff like that get to, well, if there's a potential risk, can we introduce something safer? So going as something as simple as multi-dose vaccine vials to single-dose vaccine vials. There are fewer preservatives, but there is something that's required to keep them safe and to make them effective in the way we would want. Now, could we have a similar efficacy if we just chopped up all of the Hib virus or bacteria and threw it into a syringe and popped it into our arm like you were making your own little shot smoothie?
Yeah.
We probably could, but the way that would cause potential fever and side effects and all this other stuff is why we've arrived at a system where the product that's been tested and validated over the years is what's used. And I have no desire to take away the questioning of what's best. Like, is there something better? And this really is the driver of science, and it's human nature. I mean, you read the Bible and it's like, hey, is the golden calf a better way to get to heaven, or are we just going to follow this guy through the desert or whatever? You read Huck Finn has these great snake oil salesmen, the Duke and the Dauphin, and every new town is a new scheme, right? Because people are looking. It's human nature to be curious about improving and making things better, and I think that there's something inherently good about that, and the answer for that in this context of what's the best way to help a kid make it through infancy, because they didn't always used to make it through infancy. Right now, our best answer and our best way is something like Hib's a great example of that.
Right. But if I may, and again, I do not know a lot, so hang with me on this. When you're like, look, man, we have a way to answer these questions, and it's called science. I believe in the scientific method, specifically because it works, because that camera and this iPad would not work if it weren't for science. So I don't think that there's really anybody existing in the contemporary world has to believe, at least to some base level, in the scientific method as a way of understanding the predictable outcomes in our future when I combine vinegar and baking soda and something's going to happen. That's the scientific method, right? And you will never have a case where you combine, vinegar and baking soda and nothing happens. It's like, nope, this is predictable, right? Here we go. Mm-hmm. I think at the very least, when we're having these conversations, if I could, if we could veer away from saying just trust it because hashtag science, because I'll be very, very, open about this. I have a friend who the week the Johnson & Johnson shot got pulled, took the Johnson & Johnson shot. And everybody said, trust it, it's safe, trust the science. Now, not based on any opinion that I had, but based on the opinion of people way smarter than me, and I believe people that you, in fact, trust. They got new information the week my friend got that shot, and they were like, JK, this isn't actually as safe as we need it to be to justify continuing to give it to people. Now, both of those arguments were science.
Yeah.
she got the shot because hashtag trust the science. And then 2 days later, we're removing this because trust the science. So let's avoid, if it's okay with you, I want to hear about these things on a case-by-case basis, but categorically the argument of just trust the science is one that's very difficult for me in this realm to just take wholesale. I want to know individually, and then have everyone, that decides to listen to this be able to determine individually what works. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that, I think that was something we touched upon last time. Just a little bit of this. There can be a little bit of a siege mentality when there has been some science, right? And science is not just one thing, of course, but
sure. And people engaging in science are human.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So they will do things under the umbrella of science that may not be. We're all fallible. We're egotistical. We want to see things. If my career would explode, I don't know what would make it explode. I don't even know what my career is. But if my career would explode,
I'll help you with
like
that.
If I could squint, I'm like, that looks like a dog, doesn't it? That's not like a Bob. That's definitely a dog. It's not like a mountain lion. Yeah. And like you and I are like, bro, all we have to do is convince everybody that that's a dog, right? Or even if I really believe it, because I want to believe it, and everybody else is like, but that's a mountain lion. I'm like, no, it's not. That's a dog, right? You have people engaging in the scientific method that are flawed humans, just like you have me making scrambled eggs in the morning, and I might burn them because I'm a flawed human and get distracted.
Yeah, it's human nature to become invested when we look at how science has been funded, and this I think is something that I'm not a research scientist. I apply science in my
good
job.
Thing I'm a research scientist, so I'm going to tell you.
Well, you're researching human nature, which is a science in and of itself, or an art. But the way that we have funded science recently has been driven by quote unquote success, so a positive finding, and that compounds itself. People don't want to reach their neck out and find nothing, because like now, how many millions of dollars did we spend to find nothing on that, right? And the government doesn't want that. Your pharmaceutical companies don't want that, or whatever.
The grantors don't want it. The scientific community doesn't want it. If you're trying to solve a problem, like I want the solution. You have the solution, right?
Right. So the human nature in the application of the scientific method, I would absolutely agree with you, is biased towards looking at something that's going to, have a result. And that's the nature of how science had been funded until recently. And maybe there's something to be done about that in the scientific world. Maybe there's some premium to be paid for risking something. And obviously, throughout history, a number of famed scientists were heretics at the start, right? Like, because they were willing to question groupthink. And ultimately, applied faithfully, the scientific method will bring those to the top. And when applied faithfully, may be a big enough leap that it can't be applied to current science or whatever. But I'm a lifelong Catholic, and I use religion to answer certain questions, and I use science to answer certain questions, and they're usually quite different, the questions I'm asking. And I come to you as an allopathic medical physician, so somebody that trained as an MD and did residency and yada yada yada. And our framework, our paradigm, is to the best of our ability, with the evidence that we have on hand. If it's the Johnson & Johnson vaccine at week 51, we do have to have the humility to say, if I'm invested in the scientific method, if I believe that will lead us through failure and trial and error to the answer that's closest to the truth for this question, then I have to answer that humbly to say, all these things I've been telling you about, Hib, this is what we know right now. And you're a parent sitting in front of me thinking, well, what are we going to know tomorrow? We don't have tomorrow. Like, this is our now. And so there's definitely a bias towards thinking about risk. And I think there's a hesitation in some ways to go through a list of ingredients because aluminum, that's that aluminum. And I had to go listen to the Ranch podcast for somebody to say, there's aluminum.
Yeah, right.
I was telling you all this time. It's there. Those have, everything has a risk. The shot could break off in somebody's arm. So our ability to answer that question of what's the most likely thing in a physical sense to have your kid be healthier from now through 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, this is what we're confident about. And then I had alluded to epiglottitis, a little return to clinical medicine real quick here. Somewhere between 2 and 3 unimmunized kids could get an infection of their epiglottis in the back of the throat, where air needs to move to get to your lungs. Epiglottitis, the swelling in the throat, was a classic infectious disease emergency wherein a kid would come in with a fever in what we call a tripod position, where they're just like, just trying to breathe the air. Like,
they're like pushing
just
off
like,
of their
they're kind of like leaning forward, getting that airway just to be just the barest bit open still. And similar to the meningitis story that you described, the hours of progression. And that situation in a clinical sense is one in which they, it's like, don't make the kid mad. Don't check their vitals if they don't want their vitals checked. Don't take away their stuffed animal.
Gotcha.
because the airway and the upper airway is very sensitive to crying and the velocity of the air moving through it. So you get a kid that's drooling and tripoding and this sort of stuff, and they go to the OR in their mom or dad's arms with an ENT team and an anesthesia team ready, if they can't get a tube in with a camera, to open the airway. And that's a best case scenario, right? Like, that's somebody that has a hospital with that service in place. That's somebody that isn't 3 hours away from the hospital, that recognized it, that wasn't overnight, that didn't have a snowstorm, whatever else it is.
Could we just 1 second?
Yeah.
Okay, so epiglottitis, is that what it? Okay.
Yeah.
And you said this is for like toddlers between 2 and 3?
Yeah.
So not generally something in like the first 3 months of life.
Exactly.
So 2 and 3. So you're walking around, you're moving a little bit. You can move your body and you can tell like, okay, this kid's struggling. Okay. Whole thing. And you were saying with children that have not been vaccinated for the Hib, or is that haven't been vaccinated for epiglottitis?
For Hib.
Okay.
Because Hib is a cause of epiglottitis.
Okay. So you recover, say somebody neglects to get vaccinated or decides, hey, look, I'm going to defer from the Hib vaccination. Okay. One, in the first 3 months of life, they could, in fact, get that Hib infection, which could be really bad. But say they make it to 6 months and the parents are like, there we go. We declined the shot. Totally fine. Nothing happened. Totally fine. We recognize we rolled the dice and like, we got it. Okay, fine. You move on, but then there's a secondary problem later on where it's like, okay, but now you have another window of concern from age 2 to 3. And this epiglottitis, is that caused by the same meningital bacteria?
The same bacteria, but because one of the really cool things, medically speaking, about kids is how they respond to different bacteria, viruses throughout their life. And it's kind of a hallmark of pediatrics that we look at, each age in such a different way. The Haemophilus Influenzae B, Hib, at this stage, again, this gets back to, I'm not as familiar with these things as I would have been, but roughly we give the final dose of that vaccine at 12 to 15 months.
Okay.
Because that's still younger than the age at which you started to see a peak of epiglottitis. So somewhere after 18 months, in 4-ish years or whatever, the bacteria can infect the epiglottis specifically and cause swelling in the back of the throat.
Okay, so I missed.
Does that make sense?
Epiglottitis is the symptom that is caused by the same bacteria, the Hib bacteria.
Exactly.
So again, this is very much like cerebral palsy. You're describing a series of symptoms.
Exactly.
And we call that the ailment. So epiglottitis is a swelling of the epiglottis. And that comes caused by this bacteria.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this the Hib vaccine protects you from the initial 3-month risk of having, like with the champagne tap, that whole thing, as well as the secondary window from 2 to 3 where your epiglottis might swell up if you become infected by this.
Right, exactly. And that again is equally emergent in an age at which the kids are more vocal and their distress. Again, I was describing not making them more upset, but they become clearly distressed, and families do worry. It's a more clear clinical picture, but equally emergent and in some ways more specialized in the response. So as I mentioned, with like Hib meningitis, every old pediatrician in the office would have the tools they needed to start the treatment and safely see that kid to the ER and that sort of thing. Epiglottitis is far more specialized in its treatment, and it gets to one of the values, potentially an understated value of vaccines in certain ways. And so obviously we live in a state that's both urban and rural, and the likelihood of somebody in Salmon or Chalice responding in enough time to a rapidly evolving epiglottitis is much, much lower than somebody who's in Eagle and drives into downtown Boise. And the vaccine effects and the effects of vaccine policy have that equalizing effect on risk. So if you were to say, well, this is treatable, we've got the best ENTs in the state right here, and this pediatric hospital and all this other stuff that's great, and I trust them, then I'll just not worry about it. But that's all fine and good for somebody that has access to that.
Right. So you can, essentially what you're saying is, listen, man, you can roll the dice a little bit more with your seatbelt if you're in a new Tahoe with like with the apron or curtain, airbags. Right. You got those do you remember Demolition Man? Right. It's like old Sylvester Stallone. And he the car, and instead of airbags, it was like foam came out everywhere. And then it was like stuck. I always thought about that. So the idea is that when you're getting in a car crash, it disperses foam so that when you land, you're like frozen in space. But I'm like, dude, what if you're yelling? The foam's going to go in your mouth. You're going to suffocate. It's like getting trapped in an avalanche. Oh my God. There's these are the things that keep me up at night. So it's like, you can roll the dice if you're in the Demolition Man car with the foam a lot more easily than if you're in a 56 Studebaker with nothing aside from a steel steering wheel to stop your face. Right. And so that's the idea. If you're 2 hours away, it's like, listen, everybody gets to do whatever they want 100%. But the risk you're engaging in, if you are far removed from somewhere that can get a breathing tube in, or do you have to do tracheotomies sometimes? If
potentially, that's why ENT would be there.
So that if they can't get the tube in, they're like, we got to punch a hole in his throat.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. Not a good thing at an age.
This is a lot for a Tuesday.
Do you have some coffee to help you just get a little more excited about?
It's not that I'm not excited. It's not that you know what it is? I had this funny realization the other day. I was actually wanting to tell you this. I had this funny realization the other day where it's I take in information you give me, and obviously we have the conversation, but then it rattles around in my head for weeks. I'm like, how do I process this properly? What do I think about this? Because I take in a lot of information, and I got to think about a lot of things to just orient myself, right? Because a lot of people are like, oh, I try to watch your shows. I can only watch one a day. It's like, great. I'm watching 5 a day. Yeah. Right. Think of what's going on in my head. Right. Anyway. So this is what I was thinking about. It's like, man, all of the vaccines that I got vaccinated for and, my family has engaged in all of these things. It's like, I don't know 100% how I feel about all of those. I know 99%, 98, 95%. But you know what, man? If I was going to Africa and they're like, do you want what's the one from mosquitoes? Malaria. Yeah. They're like, you want malaria vaccine? You want West Nile virus vaccine? You want, all of the, I was like, dude, give me 2. Give me the arm, give me a spray, and give me a spare just in case. Because when you're going into those areas, we're like, this is not safe. There are lions and stuff like this. We have real diseases that are floating around. That's why we sleep under mosquito nets, because if these bugs get you, you might get a disease that's gonna be bad. There was that movie, the Johnny Depp movie, where he's like a gold prospector in like South America, and he gets something from a bug, and he's laid out for weeks in this bed in his underwear. It's all nasty. But like those types of things, it's like, oh yeah, I wouldn't be asking about the aluminum. And again, at least from my perspective, it's because I've never had these conversations. I've never considered, like, I've never heard this. I'm sure I'm probably vaccinated for these things. I don't even know, but I've never understood these diseases as far as America goes. And like, oh, this is why we do these things. But knowing this is floating around out there, and even if I had a kid right out of college, this is something I would have had to confront. It's like, good Lord, man, that changes my view on a lot of them.
Oh, you're triggering my nightmares. Mosquito nets are great unless you sleep up against them, which I did in the middle of Molly one night, and I wake up the next morning and Molly.
Is that the drug?
Like the country.
Oh,
Molly's like molybdenum.
Did ecstasy?
Molly.
Like,
oh man,
what?
Bad trip. No, not good.
My God. Yeah. Keep going.
The country, and you know, I wake up and my whole arm is swollen with mosquito bites, and I'm like, well, I have been doing my malaria stuff, and I'm on my way home. I'm living in the Basque Country at the time, and I go to this small town hospital, and they're like, okay, you're in Molly, and you had 50 to 100 mosquito bites, and here you are with a fever in our small town hospital, like ding, 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 like this is like classic risk calculation, right? So
what did you contract?
It could be anything, right? It was just traveler's diarrhea in the end, but the probability, our assessment of risk, and this is, I think, underlies a really good question. Like, what is the ideal vaccine policy? Is it Denmark's policy where they have really stringent testing, follow-up, and that sort of thing for hepatitis B? Is it,
Sure.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to go to somewhere where there's everything. Give me everything. You know, we have rabies in the US, but we don't vaccinate against rabies because it has side effects. It's not very common. But if you're going to go study veterinary medicine in Calcutta, then you probably want the rabies vaccine.
Bro, you know what we have in Idaho right now? Anthrax. That's not even a joke.
Yeah.
That's not even a joke. We just lost like over a dozen head of cattle. I'm not going to tell you where or with who, but and I looked it up. I was like, is there a vaccine for anthrax? They're like, yeah, man, there's a vaccine. But man, like, and again, it works. Like, but it's like generally only the vets or like the cattle owners,
Sure.
and then they have stuff to keep the herd. But it's like, dude, anthrax
Yeah.
is in the borders of this state, and you know, I remember like 9/11, like there was a big anthrax,
Oh, yeah.
like, oh, it was like anthrax is everywhere,
next
right?
thing.
It was this was the next big scare that
Yeah.
like people were getting mail sent to them, and they were like, everybody was afraid it was going to be like laced with anthrax. Like, this is a really bad disease that I would never think about until I found out it's like, it's in Idaho. And then, of course, is there a vaccine? It's like, bless it, there's a vaccine. I feel safer now.
Yeah. And I do think that there will come a time, and there is, and that's kind of a fair example. Rabies is another example where we have a vaccine, we tolerate a certain level of circulation that we then jump on if there's spread. So in a world in which there's trust.
Right. By the way, the rabies vaccine, also something like my brother told me, he's like, never get bit by a bat. And first off, I wasn't trying to get bit by a bat. Second, if it happens, I was already asleep. It's like eating the spider in your mouth. Like, I'm already asleep, man. They're like, they have to shoot you in the stomach. I saw that movie Old Yeller when I was a kid. That was terrifying. Like, oh my God. Oh my God. And then they had to shoot him.
Yeah.
Oh, I was like, they're going to take me out and shoot me.
It's not a good ending.
No. Sad.
But we have
a certain tolerance of risk
for certain infectious disease. Sure. And our vaccine policy, our big picture, has been informed by how many visits people have to the doctor's office. What's the response to illness when that occurs? Like Hib, there's a good example. Like, what's the mortality? What's the morbidity associated with a delay in diagnosis?
Right.
Like,
what's
some
the
countries
overall risk?
Yeah, some countries vaccinate against tuberculosis. We don't do that in the United States, and we've had an exceedingly successful control of tuberculosis through other means. And so I think there can be a perception of like, oh, we're just vaccinating against all this stuff because they can, and we don't. And maybe
so what you're saying is we could actually vaccinate for a lot more things.
Sure, right. Yeah, we could. And a fair question is could we vaccinate safely for less? And this gets back to how a question is asked and how faith in that process, seen through the scientific method, can be gained within doubters or anti-vax folks. Like, how can we validate a concern and move forward in a scientific way that can say, like, I get it. Like, I see aluminum in this list, and we don't like aluminum, but you have aluminum in all these other things. And if your trade-off, let's take aluminum out. Let's see, well, we don't get the same efficacy or whatever. But I think one of the things, getting to a little bit of a siege mentality, is when COVID happened, I had some optimism that people would watch the scientific method work its way through and recognize that it doesn't have all the answers for all time. It's only answering something right now with the information we have. And when we all went through COVID, and there was times that vaccine was life-saving, and that there were times that people had adverse reactions to the vaccine, and then there were times of yes mask, no mask, yes mask. Those were all attempts to answer the question. And as people watch that, I think instead of recognizing that there is some humility to the people asking that question and some openness to a different answer, like, we know that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine had some risk now that we didn't know about before. But we know that because whoever asked that question again and again through post-vaccine licensure was willing to say yes. There's a different result than we expected. And it is hard for the person that got the J&J vaccine before it became known. It doesn't mean it was the wrong thing at the time. If you're asking the question, what is the best science at the moment?
Well, I think there are many sides to what you're saying, and one of them could be effectively articulated by saying, perhaps it wouldn't have been the best or the wrong thing to do if it was made known that there was uncertainty, and if people were given a very clear choice, not under the guise of pressure based on social and political leanings. So, yeah, if we're like, hey, man, we got this thing. We think this is a pretty good thing. Pretty sure. We're not 100% sure. And it's okay if you don't want it. But if you do want it, like, just know that this is the risk. Then whoever got it was like, they told me there was a risk, and they told me exactly what it was. And they told me that it was imperfect, and they gave me the option to not take it. Right. And again, we don't need to get into a big conversation around that, but I think the people that are most frustrated or most scarred from that experience would have an articulation around, we were forced to do something or gravely persuaded to do something that we were told for sure had no problems. And then there were problems. So there was a removal from the humility that you describe in the scientific method. Now, again, whether or not people feel that way, irrelevant to me. I did not get the Johnson & Johnson shot. I'm not saying like I have any skin in the game. I know what a lot of people have said about it. Dr. Uranga, let's do this. God bless you. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for doing round 2. What is the next conversation we're going to have? Because we did this one today. if you're game, I'd love to do another one.
Yeah.
You want to do like the mumps?
You just like the diagnosis of the mumps.
I like the mumps. I like the measles. Rubella? I don't know anything about rubella.
Yeah, we could.
That's one of the prime ones, MMR, right?
Sure.
Or other ones. Like, let's just start picking them off if you have time and the desire to do it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know any of what you just said. And now, armed with what you just said, I see the world differently.
Okay.
And I like that. I really like seeing the world differently. Anything else on this one right now?
No, I love the curiosity, and I really believe that in its purest form is the underpinning of how we answer these questions. And is this vaccine right for my child? And is this the best we can do? And if we can maintain that curiosity, I think we can get to a better place. So yeah, absolutely. So we'll choose maybe the mumps and rubella because they're part of something we take for granted in that MMR.
Yeah.
And
I have a friend who got the mumps.
and
we'll talk about it next time.
Next time.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
I really appreciate the time, all the research you put in this, and I'm really excited for this.
Okay. Thank you, sir.